Hello, Pam. Hi, Tammy. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's so good to come together again this week. I know we've been looking at so many different aspects of leadership. Last week, we talked about the young men's perspective on leadership. And today, we have something really, really special for you. We have a special guest with us, Tammy Fleming, and many of you already know her. There's so many credentials, but I'm just going to state one, and that is she is an advanced grief recovery specialist. And today, that is going to be our topic. We're going to talk about leadership and grief and everything that surrounds that process and that natural response. I know that in life, we all go through grief. I guess grief does not spare anyone, but many a times we don't know how to deal with it. We don't understand it. And, we lose our focus and we feel suppressed. But today we wanted to take this time and talk to someone who has studied it, spent time, and been certified, and who could actually speak to us so we could gain some insights. So thank you so much, Tammy, for agreeing to meet with us today.
My
We
pleasure.
appreciate your heart and just all the great things that you do for women all around the world. Like I said, there's so many credentials you have, but I just want to really tell you how grateful we are that you were joined us today. At this time, I'm going to ask Pam to go ahead and start with our
Sure.
interview.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tammy. We actually are, as leaders, we have to deal with grief. So, why do you think it's important that leaders understand this concept of grief?
That is such a great question. And I just want to start by saying thank you, both of you, so much for inviting me on and also for caring about this topic. Grief is not a pretty topic, right? It's not you don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I think I'm going to turn my thoughts and spend my day thinking about
Right.
solving the problem of grief today. I mean, we run from it generally, right? It's ugly. It's inconvenient
Mm,
and it's so misunderstood,
yeah.
truly. I wanted to share with you an answer to that question. Why is it so important that leaders especially understand the concept of grief? It is very misunderstood, first of all. So just, no one should feel badly if anything we say today comes as a surprise or out of left field, because that is the general,
Yeah.
sadly, situation. And all of us have well-meaning people, authority figures in our lives who have unfortunately often passed on inadvertently, well-meaningly, but have passed on inadvertently not the most helpful tools to us. We're
Yeah.
taught, so much as we grow up about how to gain things, how to get into university, how to get a job, how to get a girlfriend, how to get a boyfriend, how to, you know,
Yeah.
achieve and gain. We're not taught what do you do when you lose things.
Right. Right.
And so grief is hidden, actually. And why it's so important, I'm going to quote a little bit from a study that was done in 2003
Okay.
by the Grief Recovery Institute, which was about the hidden costs, the hidden annual costs of grief in America's workplace. So it's a U.S. study. But it actually applies, though the actual stats would be different from country to country. I think our cultures, though, as much as they differ, it's really interesting. Um, Grief is not handled well in many places. I don't want to make a blanket statement, but many.
Right.
So it's important because it shows up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You could actually replace the word trauma with grief, really, because what is grief? We should define it
Yeah.
probably, right? First of all, right? Grief is whenever there is an end of or a change
Mm,
in a familiar pattern of behavior.
Right.
So if you think about that, oh my goodness, even positive major life events that are positive, a marriage, a happy marriage, everyone's celebrating, but it's the end of a lifestyle. Going off to college is exciting. It's wonderful, especially if you're happy about where you're going and you're excited about your future, that's a loss event.
right.
In
Mm-hmm.
addition, a vacation, is a change in routine. Stress, any stress. What is stress? Why is stress?
Right.
Usually it's because we've lost something.
Yeah.
If you think about any disappointment,
Yeah.
any hope
Mm,
that has gone unfulfilled, or any expectation that wasn't met, those are all grief events. And
Right.
so, we can see we're talking about a lot more here than just a death of a loved one or a divorce or something like that. There's over 40 life events in a typical adult's life that can be called grief.
Wow. I think, for leaders, so many times, as you said, as you mentioned, we don't realize it's like a natural phenomenon. We all go through it, sometimes
Yes.
even every day, but because we don't know how to deal with it, it just kind of accumulates. How long would you
Exactly.
say the process of grieving takes for someone typically?
Well, and that is such a great question. And it has a unique personality in every single person.
Mm,
It's really sad that most times people think, well, just give it time. You
right.
know, I just need time. I just need to give it time and it'll be okay. That is actually one of the biggest myths
Mm,
about grief. Time does nothing to heal grief. It will dull it, it will stuff it down, but actually that often makes things worse.
mm,
Right.
You may be more numb to it, but that does not mean that we've begun to solve the problem. And so it can if that's what we do, that grief can. And it's interesting what you said, Rita. You said a minute ago that it adds up. Grief, actually, one of the characteristics of grief is that it accumulates. And
wow.
so we can stuff. You can stuff and stuff and say, "I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm being strong."
Mm,
Just give it time. I'll be okay. I'm going to distract myself. There's all sorts of things that we do thinking that this is going to make it better or time is going to make it better. But actually, it's what you do with time
mm,
that will either make it better or just
Right.
dull it until it explodes eventually. And it always does. It
Right.
always does.
Mm.
So,
wow. Wow, that leads me to the next question.
mm-hmm.
What happens when we deny or not acknowledge grief?
Well, lots of different things can. Again, it's very unique for each person.
Yeah.
One of my trainers in the grief recovery method is a public health expert. She was actually the person, I got to give her a little kudo here. Her name's Lois Hall. She's fabulous. And she's the person, if you ever buy in North America a bottle of baby aspirin,
Mhm.
and there's a warning on there about Ray's syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
about giving aspirin to infants, to young children. She's the person in her graduate studies that did the study that broke through and discovered the cause of infant death,
Oh, wow.
linking it to aspirin. But she is so passionate about almost any public health
Mm-hmm.
problem you can link back to grief, from ulcers to obesity to any stress related illness, cancer. Because what happens, there's quite a lot, it's really actually wonderful. There's quite a lot now out in popular psychology and in, I see literature and articles about this all the time everywhere, that the body keeps the score, really famous
Yeah.
bestseller right now, right? Our bodies react to stress.
Mm,
And whether or not we choose to listen to, we have another friend, actually a sister, Heather McKean,
mm,
talks about it this way, that your body is trying to have a conversation with you.
right.
And
Yeah.
grief, you will feel grief in your body somewhere.
Mm,
And you can think it's something else. Oh, my back's out, I got a migraine, or, whatever. And, I don't want to go all woo woo on us. Maybe, who knows, really, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a, psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm an educational
yes.
specialist in a very narrow area. But I can speak for myself, and anecdotal evidence of, grief. It has a location in the body, your throat, your
Mm,
ulcer, your,
wow.
you know, insomnia, all sorts of things.
Oh, wow. As I'm hearing you, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I have so many of those symptoms all through my life. But really, I think about our faith, and I think about how, God does promises that grief will turn to joy, and there will be a time for grief, but it will turn to joy. And I know we have to take responsibility and do something about it,
Mm-hmm.
and not just wait for it to automatically happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think about when we feel sick, we go to the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
or we have a specific problem, we know, okay, we need to go to a therapist. But a lot of us, unfortunately, we're not aware, or we don't have the resources or the money to go to a
Mm-hmm.
therapist who can help us handle these feelings of grief. What
Mm-hmm.
would you say? What advice would you give for someone like that? How can they learn to, heal from this? Or how can they learn to deal with their own grief? What are some things they can do?
Well, let me back up for 1 second, because since you mentioned religious believers and people who have faith, sometimes, just it's worth a mention, sometimes, again, well-meaning, I'm a believer as well. I love my faith. But definitely sometimes we who believe in God make the mistake of applying biblical principles not in the best way. And it's again because you don't know what you don't know, you know? And so the way we've been trained, there's things we just kind of, you see through a filter, right? And so things like one of my first classes of grief recovery that I had, first groups I had, it was a group of believers, and the question came out, so why did this not work? Somebody was grieving in my group, and I told them, God doesn't test you beyond what you can bear. Mm. And they didn't appreciate that. Why is that not right? The Bible is always true. That's true. That's God's word. And it was such a great question because we do get stuck there. We think, well, I should, there's all these scriptures about be grateful, be thankful in all things, always give thanks to God. And God doesn't test us beyond what we can bear. And God will work everything out in the end, Romans 8:28 and all these things, right? However, we miss the fact that that's not exactly how Jesus did not give the whole truth to people right up front. He did not choose his disciples and say to them, hey, come follow me. And by the way, all of you are going to die a terrible, traumatic death. That was true. Right. And he knew that, I believe, but he did not start there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, there are other scriptures that I did anyway, just kind of bleep right over. Things like in Ecclesiastes, there's meant to be time to mourn. There's time for everything, including time to mourn. Well, yeah. Who gives yourself time to mourn? I mean, yeah. It's not, some people do, and that's wonderful, but many of the people that come to me have been told, no, push on, distract yourself, be strong, don't dwell on it, don't re-traumatize yourself. There's nothing you can do, so just look on the bright side. And yes, that's true. There's nothing I can do. Yeah. But just being strong or pushing on, that doesn't help me. Right. Right. So, anyway, sorry, I wanted to back up there and just say believers just need to be aware that there's probably more there for us to explore than maybe what we've automatically used. Sorry, can you repeat your question now?
So what would I do if I don't have the resource to go to a specialist? How could I help myself go through this process of grief? Like, what can I do?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that there's a really easy solution out there, actually. We can take control of our grief. And it does take effort. It does take some time. But I can tell you the short version is to learn some practical steps. It doesn't take a lot, but learn some practical steps so that I have some skills that maybe I wasn't given growing up or I haven't picked up along the way. And then continue to use them as there are more and new losses. And where I'll tell you where I found them was here in the Grief Recovery Handbook. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. And why I spent a year and investigated all the available grief programs that were out in the U.S. 4 years ago. Yeah. And I settled on this one, on the grief recovery method, because it was the only one. It's called the Action Program for Moving Beyond Grief and Loss. It's the only one that gave me A, B, C, D. Do that. And I told you I'm a Christian person. I found the principles and the steps absolutely in line with my faith and what I see in the scriptures. And so I thought, well, here we go. So there's a way, they use the term of completing grief or grief that's incomplete. And so obviously I can't go back and change what happened. I had my early traumas in childhood. My father died when I was 12, but he was diagnosed with a terminal illness when I was 10 and disappeared from our family. We went in the hospital. I never saw him again until he came home to die 2 years later. Mm-hmm. And then my mother died fairly young, and a whole string of losses in my teenage years. And I just, I was really proud, and I am really proud of myself that I got through all of that. However, it was absolutely incomplete. Why? Why was it incomplete? Because there were emotional truths that were so dear to me back then. My 10-year-old self to my father, why are you not letting me visit you in the hospital? Right. And we never had that conversation. So, you know, I don't carry a grudge. I don't, but that communication stayed with me. There was emotional energy around that hurt me. It was painful. I didn't understand. And so someone needs to hear that. I believe we're created for connection. We're created to connect to one another.
Yeah.
And so that pain that's inside of us, it has got to come out, or else it'll come out in illness or anger.
Yeah.
Or some other inappropriate emotional response. It's interesting. I notice in my, I volunteer in ministry as well. And I notice that quite often, a lot of people in my work, colleagues of mine, are not able emotionally to hold space sometimes for other people's pain because they've got so much incomplete grief themselves that when someone comes along with a really difficult problem, they can't, there's no space. It's not that there's nothing wrong with them. Actually, it's what's right with them. There's no space anywhere. And so they just spill over. They hear something, one more thing. They're already up to here with disappointment, unmet expectations, hopes that haven't taken place or whatever. And now here comes one more thing from another person. I can't even hear it. And so you put a Band-Aid on it, or you try to fix it. Just, let me fix it. Let me just fix it. And unfortunately, what happens then is it's a cycle. That poor person doesn't feel heard because I've stuck a Band-Aid on you instead of letting you connect with the pain that's in you. And I'll speak for myself again. I'm not that great I don't communicate real well in just 5 minutes. I need some time to speak and share before I get down deep enough to what I'm really feeling and can then say, okay, oh, this is what I feel. This is what I'm feeling, and speak it. And then so often, if you can find someone who listens to you and you're able to express, quite often they'll start giving you solutions, right? Which that's nice later. People don't feel heard, right? If we start fixing them right away. So I would say, honestly, the best thing you can do is go buy a copy. And by the way, this is not a plug for me. I get nothing from this. They are such a great organization. All they want to do, these people at the Grief Recovery Institute, is help the greatest number of grievers in the smallest amount of time. And so there's nobody's making tons of money off of this. Certainly not I. So, but it's worth it. Just go buy a copy of the book and read it and put it into practice. That's what I would do.
Yeah, thank you for that resource. So definitely check it out. I know we're just kind of barely touching the surface, but would you have any best practices in dealing with grief that you can give our viewers?
Sure. I think we've touched on a couple of them already. I mean, I think what grievers need is to be heard.
Yeah.
And probably one of the hardest things to do is to let someone speak their pain. Right. And not feel compelled, because people usually, if you're letting someone speak to you, you're a compassionate person, and so you're moved, right? It's natural to want to help and want to make things better. Very natural. Unfortunately, it doesn't always help. Another trainer I had in grief recovery method uses the term story stealing, which is something I really am careful about now. I used to do it constantly, and now I'm very careful. Sometimes it helps people when you say, oh, you had pneumonia 3 times, so did I. Right. Because it normalizes. Right. But a lot of the time, it doesn't help. And the person just switches off and goes, well, you're not listening to me. Yeah. You want to talk about yourself. So whether or not they have that conscious process or not, that's what happens. And so I guess the two things I would say real simply is to just remember that grievers need to be heard. They have a lot of emotional energy around some pain in their heart. Yeah. The best thing we could do is let them speak it. Yeah. And not react, not judge, not pigeonhole them or label them. They may feel differently tomorrow. Right. But they just need to speak. Yeah. And so the best thing we can do is say, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's it. Awesome. That's it. Just thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
I know you touched a little bit on spirituality earlier. Tammy, how would you say spirituality and grief, how do they support each other? Like, how could we use our faith and just our knowledge and our trust in God to help us go through this time? Because in times of grief, we feel so abandoned and so lonely that we even disconnect from God.
It's true.
So,
It's true.
in your counseling or in your practice, what have you seen? How can this help us? Just our faith?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I see so much in the scriptures now. I mean, God is a griever,
Mm.
actually. Jesus is a griever. And if anybody's interested, I have on my website, I have a study about Jesus and the losses in his life while he was in the flesh. It's actually amazing, the different variety of losses that Jesus experienced. His father died at some point along the way, but even loss of, idealism. Who were the people
Yeah,
that killed him?
yeah,
It was the ones at whose feet he was sitting when he was 12.
yeah,
And yet they were the ones, a couple of decades later that were killing him, wanting to kill him. Anyway, so, loss of trust, all sorts of things. Loss of, he watched his peers all get married and have kids, loss of that. But I would say definitely, when we are experiencing loss, if we believe in God, that's one of the first places we go, like, what are you doing? How are you not, I thought you had my back. I thought I was your child. Why would a loving parent allow this horrible, horrible thing to happen in my life? And there are horrible things. I mean, I'm sure I mean, we could list some of them, that have happened to people. I mean, mothers on Mother's Day who discover their teenage children have committed suicide in their beds on Mother's Day. I mean, it's just terrible what happens in life.
yeah,
Suicide, I think, is one of the worst, one of the hardest traumas, I think, for people. When a loved one commits suicide, you just, oh my goodness, it's so incredibly painful. And so if you have a faith, it's really common to go to God and say, what is wrong with you? How could you? And so again, what's inside has got to come out. And I would just like to say, God can handle anything that we have to offer. And if we ever wonder about that, God has deliberately put in the Bible for us the entire book of Lamentations, a lament.
yeah,
And the Psalms actually are full of the full range of human emotion. And a few of the Psalms, if you'll notice, do not end happily. There's a few of them that just end. One of them ends, darkness is my only friend.
yes.
And that's where it stops. It's not hallelujah or, but I'll be okay, or, but I know I should just, praise you, God. No, it's just darkness is my only friend. The Bible is full of things like you have allowed an army to trample me in the dust. You promised this and I got the exact opposite.
Right.
Who could trust you? I mean, and it's what's wonderful about that is that there's nowhere in the Bible where God ever says, that's not okay, that you rant at me like that. Actually, it's there for us to understand. It's a real relationship. And there's going to be times when we are angry, when we don't understand. You're the one with all the power. How could you not help me?
Yeah.
And so I would just say, figure out your pain and speak it to God in prayer. It doesn't have to be pretty, just whatever you feel that to me, it's got to come out.
Awesome.
And he can take it. So.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Thanks for that. Because I think I remember just having this sense of this false idea of I have to be perfect. I have to present myself good to God. And then I couldn't just come to God and just be real and just be like, whatever's going on. And so I love the reminders. I mean, over the, of course of time, I've learned that God loves us for who we are and it's okay to be real. But I think it's such a great reminder that God accepts you as who you are, and I don't have to be perfect. I can be real. I can be just in all my, disgrace and unhappiness and sadness. And he will accept me. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like you've given us so much. And I just wanted to take some time to just recap what I personally learned.
Sure.
When you've talked to us as leaders, we need to increase our capacity to hold space for others. So we avoid that Band-Aid that doesn't work. As leaders, we want to quickly fix the pain or take the pain, and it doesn't work. So let's just learn from that. And just to see Jesus, who he didn't give the whole truth. He met people where they're at. And sometimes we might see the big picture and we want people to get it, but we have to meet people where they're at and sit in the pain, because that's what I see Jesus doing. And I think what people really need is to be heard and let them speak their pain and avoid story stealing. We don't need to go and tell our story in the middle of their pain, and don't react, don't judge, don't pigeonhole them. So thank you for those insights for leaders. And I think for grievers, we all go through grief, and we need to learn to listen to our bodies. Sometimes we just have to let's deny ourselves and move, but we need to hear, because our body carries the grief and it's not going anywhere. It's going to burst if we don't listen and slow down. And thank you for that insight of how God is a griever. Sometimes when we know that God actually came down, he didn't have to grieve, he didn't have to suffer, but he's familiar with suffering. He empathizes with us. What a gift. And so to be able to be with that pain, recognize the pain, sit with God, pour it out to him, and there's scriptures like Lamentations, Psalms. Thank you for highlighting. So, figure out our pain. There's so much insight. Thank you, Tammy, for just bringing and giving us some guidance. And I know we've touched the surface. If people want to find you or get more resources, we'll definitely, the grief recovery, where can they find you? Are you open to that?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a website. It's TammyTaxterFleming.com. And also I'm on Facebook. Tammy Fleming Grief Recovery Method is on Facebook. So you can find me either way.
Awesome. We can add that to our post.
Great.
Great.
Yes.
All right. I think we're coming to the end of our musing. I just want to say thank you to our viewers for your support and continual just encouragement. We just want to, like I said, we just want to add value to you and, just give you that insight or anything that you can work on. As you see, we continue to learn as well. And once again, thank you, Tammy, for joining us. And, it's just enriching us on this topic of grief. And I know, like Pam said, we just touched the surface. We are definitely going to pay more attention to it and learn through what we have to go, what we go through in life. So thank you, everyone. We will see you next week. There's more to come, so stay tuned. And bye for now.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, ladies. Bye.